No, I didn't have a clue I was going to wind up being a filmmaker. I was a movie fan when I was a kid, but growing up in rural Canada in a village of 1,500 people, it honestly just never would have occurred to me that I would wind up, working in Hollywood and be a filmmaker. What drove me then, and what still drives me now, is curiosity. I always had this powerful curiosity about the way things work, and I love nature and the natural world. My family lived next to open land in rural Canada, and I used to spend all my free time out in the woods collecting bugs and snakes, frogs, whatever I could find, and I'd collect pond water and take it back and look at it under the microscope, and I'd identify the various protozoa and draw them out. And I was looking outward as well with my little 3-inch reflector telescope at the moon and the rings of Saturn. I guess I was a scientist without really knowing it. And I was driven by this insatiable desire to explore and to understand. Now, needless to say, by the time I was in high school, this fascination with science was less than fashionable. Now, the word nerd had not been invented yet, but I was that guy. I was definitely the nerdiest guy in my high school. Give you an example, I was the head of the science club, which consisted of me and this one Czechoslovakian girl that didn't speak any English. And I even had to show you how pathetic this is, I even had to form the science club so that I could be the president of it. But for me, science and science fiction kind of inhabited the same realm of wonder. I used to ride the bus to school. It was an hour each way a day, and I always had my nose in a science fiction book, and I'd read the books down behind the math text in math class, and I was always off on a journey to some other world. I loved the stories about space travel and other exotic worlds populated with strange alien creatures and exotic cultures. And this was the 60s. So the real world that was out there was actually resonating with this science fiction world that I was, surrounding myself with, because, we were heading for the moon, and the underwater world was being explored by Jacques Cousteau and others with, these fantastic diving machines. Anything and everything seemed possible, and the reach of human inquiry seemed infinite. And there wasn't the same kind of glut of fantasy images that we have in media now, and video games and CG movies. So we had to read it and imagine it in the dark theater of our own minds based on the author's descriptions. And the images in these books were so powerful that my response to that was that I had to draw what I saw in my head. I had to draw it out. I had to paint them and even put them into my own stories. And the next cognitive leap was the Jacques Cousteau specials on TV gave me an idea that I might not ever really go to another planet and explore it myself, but there was this world right here on Earth, under the water, that looked as alien as anything in these books that I was reading. So I decided that I had to learn to scuba dive. The only problem was that I was living 600 miles from the nearest ocean, in a little village in Canada called Chippewa. But I drove my dad crazy enough that he enrolled me at the age of 16 in a course at a YMCA pool in Buffalo, New York, right across the border, in the dead of winter in February. And that's how I learned to dive, in a pool. And in the 40 years since then, I've spent probably 3,000 hours underwater. Of that, maybe 500 hours in deep submersibles, and maybe another 500 hours or so in diving helmets. And my love of the ocean and this childlike wonder at its mysteries has only grown stronger. And I realize all these years later that I've been pursuing this kind of science fiction dream and making it a reality by really exploring in an alien world, albeit one right here on Earth. Now, in college I majored in physics. I was never dreaming of a career in film. The fascination with physics was really more of a personal quest for understanding than a career path. Physics, cosmology, astronomy, this was all a pursuit of answers to the great unknowables. And I just loved it. Unfortunately, got a C in calculus. And I realized I was never going to do anything great in physics. So I switched to English, because I figured if I couldn't do science, at least I could write science fiction. And pretty soon, that didn't even work, because I came to the conclusion that English lit was not the right way for me to find a personal voice as a writer. I figured I needed to live a little bit first in order to have something to say. So I dropped out and I went to work. And the jobs were all blue-collar jobs. I was a precision tool and die machinist. I was a truck driver. I was even a high school janitor. And you ever wonder who the poor schmuck was that scrapes the gum off from underneath the desk all those years when you were putting it there? And that was me. But at night and on weekends, I was writing and I was drawing and painting. I was still trying to reconcile the storytelling gene and the visual arts gene. And then I happened to fall in with some friends in Orange County, this was in California now, who were making short films. And I wound up catching the movie-making bug. But the kind of films that I wanted to make couldn't be done with a little 8mm camera. I love the magic of the big science fiction and fantasy epics, the visual effects movies that took us to other worlds. 2001: A Space Odyssey was basically like a religious experience for me. I had to know how that was done. So I put myself through film school in a kind of unique way. I had read that USC had the best cinema department around, and I was living in Orange County, and USC was only about 50 miles away. So every Saturday, this was during the time I was a truck driver, I'd go to the USC campus, and I'd go into the library, into the stacks, and I'd Xerox hundreds of pages of journals and papers on optical printing and bipack cameras and retroreflective front screen projection materials and film sensitometry and whatever I could get my hands on. And then I organized it all in these big black binders and created my own reference library at home. So I basically gave myself a graduate course in visual effects for the cost of Xeroxing while I was working as a truck driver. And then in 1977, this little movie called Star Wars came out. And sure, I was blown away like everybody else was, but for me it was different. Because here I was seeing up on that screen the kind of images that have been playing in my mind since I was a teenager. And I felt like one of those homeless people that thinks the government is spying on their brain, you know, with the tinfoil hats, because that was my stuff up there. But it was a light bulb moment, because I thought, this is the biggest film in history, and if that's the kind of imagery that people want to see, then there's a market for what I was imagining. So I quit my job, and I raised some money from a group of dentists looking for a tax shelter, and I made a short science fiction film for, it's a true story. You can't make this stuff up. They gave me $20,000 to make a short film, science fiction film. I told them I was an expert in this. It was all in the binders, right? And I used this film to get in the door of low-budget film productions, and I eventually got hired in the model shop of a movie being made by Roger Corman, the low-budget B-movie king. The movie was called Battle Beyond the Stars. And it was my first actual paycheck on a movie. It was October 1979. Now, within a few weeks, I had managed to convince Roger that what he really needed on this movie was front screen projection to tie the model effects, which were being done by one department, in with the live action with the actors, which were being done elsewhere. And, of course, I told him that I was an expert. I'd never actually done it. I didn't tell him that. It's all in the binders. So I set up the front projection department. I just made up my own department. And everything came together. You know, my time in the USC stacks had given me the theoretical knowledge to design the system, which retroreflective materials to use, what vendors to contact. As a machinist, I knew my way around blueprints, so I was able to draw up the front screen projection rig, send it out for fabrication. As a mechanic, I could assemble the whole thing and make it work. So we actually started making front screen projection shots and working directly with the live action unit. And this was my first time on a real movie set. What followed was this incredibly intense 2-year period of working on these ultra low budget movies. And the learning curve was steep, and the pay was low, but the enthusiasm was off the charts.